On winter nights, when the world grows quiet and the snow drifts like ancient whispers, some stories rise from the cold to remind us that courage still walks among us. In a forgotten cabin high in the mountains, a wounded officer, a loyal German shepherd, and a man who had almost given up on himself would cross paths in a way that felt carved by fate itself. Their journey did not begin with glory. It began with fear, with darkness, and with a single bark that refused to surrender. Before we step into this tale of loyalty, redemption, and the quiet miracles that find us in our hardest hours, tell us where you're watching from. Let your voice join the circle of storytellers gathered here tonight. Winter in North Vale Ridge did not simply arrive, it conquered. Snow swept across the Pine Mountains like a white tide, burying roads, fences, and memories beneath layers of silent frost. Even the wooden cabins scattered across the valley creaked under the weight of ice, as if whispering to one another through the storm. This was a land where silence held dominion, and every footstep, every breath, seemed to echo through the cold. In a small cabin near the base of Bear Claw Peak lived Elias Hart, a 42-year-old former police detective. Elias stood 6 feet tall, with a broad, work-worn frame shaped by years of searching crime scenes, chasing suspects, and carrying emotional weights no man ought to bear alone. His hair, once dark, had begun to silver at the temples, and a faint scar ran from his right eyebrow to the cheekbone, a reminder of a hostage case gone wrong 6 years earlier. His eyes were a muted steel blue, the color of winter mornings, always observing, always measuring. People in town described him as the quiet sort, polite, calm, but with an invisible wall around him. He wasn't unfriendly, he was simply a man who had seen too much to share easily. And after the forced leave from the department due to trauma he never discussed, Elias had chosen North Vale Ridge for its silence. He had been here only 6 weeks, too new to understand the full history of his property, too weary to ask. That evening, wind battered the thin glass panes as if demanding entry. Snow swirled in harsh gusts, blotting out the world beyond the porch. Elias sat near the old iron stove, feeding it pine logs, listening to the storm's roar, one of the few voices he never minded. Outside, winter pressed against every window like a living creature. Inside, warmth glowed softly, touching the worn wooden walls. Elias held a cup of black coffee, steam rising into the dim room, the quiet rhythmic crackle of the fire briefly lulling him into the rare comfort of calm. Then, a sound, soft, wrong. At first it seemed like the wind had snagged a loose plank, but then it came again, faint and pleading. Scratch, scratch, followed by a muffled sound that was neither wind nor animal cry. Elias's posture changed instantly. Years of instinct returned in a breath. He set down the mug, moved silently to the coat rack, and took his heavy winter jacket. His heartbeat didn't quicken, training didn't allow it, but something deep inside stirred. He reached for the flashlight by the doorway, its metal cold against his palm, and unlatched the door. Snow rushed in like an invading wave. His breath plumed white as he stepped out onto the porch. The storm bit at his face. For a moment, he saw only white, snow twisting and cutting through the air in violent swirls. Then a shape appeared beneath the railing, half buried in drifted snow. First, he saw an arm, then the body it belonged to. And suddenly, the entire world sharpened. A man lay collapsed on the porch, steps, half conscious, half frozen, blood darkening the snow beneath him. He was in his early 30s, with pale skin and short brown hair matted by frost. His uniform, torn, stained, covered in ice, still bore the shredded patch of the North Vale Police Department. His face was gaunt with pain, a fresh cut along his jaw and another across his forehead. His breathing was shallow, uneven, as though his lungs fought for each gasp. And guarding him, through cold, through pain, through sheer force of will, was a German shepherd. The dog stood between Elias and the fallen officer, though its legs trembled violently. Snow clung to its sable coat, which was dark across the saddle and lighter along the flanks. One ear hung slightly bent, giving the dog a hardened yet gentle appearance. Old age marked the silver around its muzzle, clearly at least 10 years old, but there was strength in those dark, alert eyes. Beneath the fur, Elias could see the outline of a bandage wrapped hastily around the dog's hind leg, stained with fresh blood. Its posture was defensive, but not aggressive, as if begging for help while warning him not to harm its companion. Elias raised his hand slowly. "Easy there, boy." His voice softened instinctively. "I'm here to help." The dog growled, a weak, exhausted sound, but did not attack. Instead, it stepped closer to the officer, pressing its body against him as though shielding him not from Elias, but from the storm itself. Elias crouched, keeping his movement smooth and deliberate. "It's all right," he murmured. "I've got you." The dog stared at him, deep, searching, desperate, and then its legs gave out. It collapsed gently across the officer's chest, letting out a soft, broken whine as if surrendering its final strength. That sound pierced Elias more deeply than the cold ever could. He reached forward, checking the officer's pulse, weak but present. He slid his arm under the man's shoulders and, with a grunt of effort, lifted him up. The officer was athletic, but young, his build leaner than Elias's heavier frame. Elias carried him inside, placing him carefully on the worn sofa near the stove. He returned through the storm for the dog. The snow stung his eyes, and wind pushed at his body, but he found the German shepherd lying where he fell. Elias lifted the dog gently into his arms. The animal whimpered once, but didn't resist. The weight was solid, around 75 or 80 pounds of aging muscle and loyalty. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around them. Elias set the dog on a thick wool blanket beside the stove. The gentle light illuminated the years in the animal's tired eyes. He whispered softly, "You're safe here." Then Elias turned to the officer. He unbuttoned the man's torn uniform jacket. A small nameplate clung to the fabric. Rowan Blake, North Vale PD. Elias examined the wounds, bruising along the ribs, a deep laceration on the shoulder, old, frostbite beginning at the fingertips. Rowan Blake had fought to survive, fought hard. It was a miracle he had reached the cabin at all. The dog watched Elias with unwavering attention, its chest rising and falling with pained breaths. But its devotion remained unbroken. Elias looked between them, this injured officer and his steadfast companion. He didn't know their story yet. He didn't know how they had ended up crawling through a blizzard to his door. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They hadn't survived by chance. They had survived because this dog refused to let its partner die. Outside, the blizzard growled against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled, warming the small space. Elias washed the blood from his hands and began preparing the first aid kit. He glanced once more at Rowan and the dog lying beside him. "Let's keep you alive long enough to tell me what happened," Elias whispered, pulling the blanket higher over Rowan's chest. And though he didn't show it on his face, something old and heavy inside him stirred, the sense of purpose he thought he had buried with his badge. Tonight, the storm had brought him more than strangers. It had brought back the man he once was. And as the wind howled, Elias' heart knew one truth. This night was only the beginning. Morning arrived reluctantly in North Vale Ridge, dragging a pale, icy light across the valley. The storm had quieted, but its presence remained. Heavy snow blanketed the cabin roof. Icicles hung like frozen daggers from the eaves, and a biting wind filtered between the pines, carrying that distinct winter scent of cold metal and wet bark. The mountains loomed in silence, majestic and indifferent, as if watching the cabin with ancient knowing eyes. Inside, warmth flickered gently from the stove. Elias' heart had spent the night tending to the unconscious man and the injured dog. Fatigue pressed against his shoulders, but he moved with calm precision, the way he used to during overnight stakeouts. Calculated, steady, attentive. He didn't mind the exhaustion, not when someone's life hung in the balance. The dog, Rex, shifted slightly beside the stove, his paws twitching in a dream or pain. Elias watched him for a moment. Even in sleep, the German shepherd seemed ready to spring to his partner's defense. There was loyalty woven into every line of that aging body, carved through years of service and trust. Elias knelt beside him, gently checking the makeshift bandage. The wound was ugly, but clean enough to survive until he could bring a real medic. "You're a tough old boy," he murmured, brushing his fingers lightly along Rex's neck. The dog didn't wake, but his breathing eased, as if recognizing the reassurance. A soft groan rose from the couch. Elias stood immediately. The officer, Rowan Blake, stirred beneath the blanket. his eyelids twitching before slowly opening. His gaze darted around the dim room, instincts firing, confusion flooding his features. Elias approached, hands visible, reassuring. "You're safe," Elias said. His voice was low, steady, the tone he used when calming victims in the field. "You're in my cabin, Northvale Ridge." Rowan blinked again, his pupils adjusted to the light, and his lips parted, throat dry. He looked younger awake, vulnerable in a way that made Elias's chest tighten with a strange mix of protectiveness and déjà vu. It reminded him of rookies he once trained, raw and eager, before life carved them into something sharper. "My dog," Rowan croaked. "He's alive," Elias answered quickly. "In pain, but alive." He gestured toward the stove. Rowan's gaze followed and softened instantly at the sight of Rex resting on the blanket. A faint tremble crossed the officer's jaw, relief, deep and unguarded. Elias brought him water. Rowan struggled to sit up, muscles shaking from cold and exhaustion. Elias placed a supportive hand behind his back, easing him upright. "What's your name?" Rowan asked weakly. "Elias Hart." Rowan's brow furrowed slightly. "Hart, the detective? The one who left the force in—" Elias cut him off gently. "Long story. Not important right now. What matters is how you ended up nearly frozen to death on my porch." For a long moment, Rowan stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. Then he exhaled slowly, the weight of memory settling across his shoulders. "I wasn't supposed to survive last night," Rowan said quietly. Elias waited, sensing the dam beginning to crack. Rowan swallowed hard, his voice rough. "I'm with Northvale PD. I've been tracking the winter crows for months, the cartel using the mountain routes when the snowpack is thick enough to hide tracks. They've got money, weapons, connections, and someone on the inside feeding them everything." His hands trembled, not from cold now, but from the memory of betrayal. "I got a tip yesterday. Said there would be movement near the South Canyon Trail. Supposedly a small drop. I didn't trust the source completely, but it matched patterns I'd been piecing together." Rowan paused, his jaw tightening. "Turns out the tip wasn't real. It was bait. They wanted me there, alone." Elias lowered himself into the chair across from him, expression unreadable. "How many?" "3 shooters, maybe 4, Rowan said. "They waited along the ridge, ambushed me as soon as I crossed the clearing, shot at Rex first. He pushed me down, took grazing fire along his hind leg. Then they came for me." His breath hitched. Elias noticed he was clutching the blanket as if anchoring himself to the moment. "Rex dragged me," Rowan whispered, "over a mile, through snow up to his chest. He refused to let me stop." He shook his head, eyes glassy. "He kept me alive long enough to reach your cabin. If he hadn't, I'd be under the snow by now." Elias felt something shift, a subtle ache in his chest. He had seen loyalty before. Human loyalty was fragile, unpredictable. But a dog like Rex, loved without fear or hesitation. "You said someone inside the department set you up?" Elias asked. Rowan nodded slowly. "I didn't want to believe it at first, but the more I dug, the more things didn't add up. Reports disappearing, patrol schedules altered, tips that led nowhere, or worse." He swallowed. "Someone high up has been feeding the cartel our moves, someone with access." Elias tapped a fingertip against the armchair, deep in thought. In his years on the force, he'd learned that betrayal rarely came from strangers. It came from the person who shook your hand in the hallway, the one who smiled in every briefing. Rowan took another breath. "I was getting too close, and they couldn't risk me exposing the wrong person." Silence settled, heavy but not suffocating. Elias stood, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and handed one to Rowan. The officer wrapped his hands around the ceramic as though it were the first warmth he'd felt in days. The cabin hummed with the soft crackle of burning wood. Outside, wind scraped against the walls. Elias watched Rowan sip the coffee, studying the younger man's posture, the way he held tension, like someone accustomed to danger but unaccustomed to running from it. Rowan finally looked up. "Why did you help us?" Elias met his gaze without wavering. "Because you were dying on my porch, and because that dog of yours wouldn't give up." Rex lifted his head at the sound of their voices. He attempted to move closer but winced. Elias quickly rose and knelt beside the dog, steadying him with a gentle hand on the shoulder. Rowan's eyes softened. He's my partner. For 8 years now. Best nose in the division. Best instincts I've ever seen. He paused, voice catching. He's old, though. I shouldn't have taken him out on a risky lead, but he insisted. He always knows when something isn't right. Elias smiled faintly. Smart dog. The smartest, Rowan whispered. Elias returned to his chair. Listen, he said, tone shifting to something firmer. If someone in your department tipped off the cartel, they'll be looking to confirm whether you made it out. They may have followed your trail as far as the storm allowed. Rowan stiffened. You think they saw the cabin? Elias didn't answer immediately. He remembered the faint imprint he noticed earlier, the shape of footprints half filled with snow, pointing toward the tree line. Not enough to make a conclusion, but enough to keep a man awake. I think, Elias said finally, that this isn't over. Rowan absorbed that in silence, then nodded grimly. I need to contact someone I trust, someone outside the department, but I lost my radio and my phone was destroyed. Whoever did this made sure I had no way out. Elias considered. The Ridge had no reliable cell service, but he did have an old satellite phone, a tool he hadn't touched since leaving the force. Not because he didn't need it, but because he refused to be reachable. He retrieved it from a drawer and placed it on the table between them. You can use this, he said. Rowan stared at the device, as though Elias had handed him a lifeline. Thank you, he whispered, but Elias lifted a hand. Not yet. First you rest. When you're strong enough, you tell your story to whoever you trust. But until then, he glanced toward the frosted window, watching the shadow of a pine sway. We keep the cabin quiet. We watch, and we wait. Rex let out a soft grunt of agreement, curling closer to the stove. Elias leaned back in his chair, the weight of a familiar tension settling into his bones, the tension of a man preparing for trouble. Trouble he did not ask for, but trouble that had arrived anyway, carried by snow and fate to his doorstep. Rowan closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. I thought I escaped last night, he murmured, but it feels like the beginning of something worse. Elias stared into the fire, flames reflecting in his eyes like shards of memory. Survival, he said quietly, is never the end. It's always the beginning of the next fight. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, slow, quiet, relentless. Inside the cabin, 3 lives shared the same fragile warmth, bound together by danger they didn't yet understand. And the storm that brought them together had only brushed the surface of what waited in the shadows of North Vale Ridge. The storm weakened overnight, leaving behind a world of white silence. Snow lay heavy on the pines surrounding the cabin, bending their branches like weary giants forced into prayer. Morning light filtered through the thinning clouds, soft and muted, giving everything a dreamlike quality. Too peaceful, too still, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Elias Hart stepped outside onto the porch, boots sinking slightly into the thick drifts. The cold stung his cheeks, but he welcomed it. He had always trusted winter more than people. Winter, at least, never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Harsh, honest, unforgiving. Inside the cabin, Rowan Blake eased himself upright on the sofa, grimacing as his ribs tightened. The bluish bruising had spread across his side overnight, but his eyes were clearer now, more focused. Determination shone through exhaustion. Rex, the aging German shepherd, was already awake. Though still limping heavily on his injured hind leg, the dog's ears perked the moment Elias returned inside. The stove's warmth deepened the golden tones in Rex's sable coat, though streaks of gray along his muzzle betrayed his years. Even so, there was alertness in him, a readiness born from instinct and training that time had not dulled. We need to check something, Elias said, as he shrugged off snow from his shoulders. There's a storage shed behind the cabin. Previous owner left a bunch of junk. I never got around to clearing it. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Something wrong? Elias hesitated. Maybe, maybe not. But before the storm hit last night, I noticed something odd. Fresh tire tracks on the ridge trail leading toward the back of the property. They were nearly covered this morning. Someone was close. Rowan's expression tightened. Could have been the cartel checking their old drop point. Elias nodded. Exactly. Rex let out a low rumble, tail stiff. It was as if he understood every word. Rowan slid a coat over his shoulders and stood, moving slowly, holding his ribs. Let's see what's out there. The three stepped into the cold. Their breath rose in plumes as they crossed the snowy path toward the shed about 40 yards behind the cabin. The structure was old, older than the cabin itself, constructed of weathered pine planks bleached pale by years of winter. The roof bowed slightly under the weight of snow, and a loose shutter creaked in the wind. Elias pushed open the door, and the old hinges groaned like something awakening. A gust of cold air carried the scent of mildew, rust, and old timber. Dust hung in the dim light, spilling through the cracks in the walls. Inside were remnants of another owner's life: broken tools, a rusted wheelbarrow, cracked wooden crates, tarps stiff from age and frost. Snow had drifted in through a missing corner panel, leaving a thin patch of white near the doorway. The space was silent until scritch. Rex's claws slid, faintly against the wooden floor. The dog had limped forward and was now standing rigid, nose pointed toward a corner of the shed. His ears were pricked forward, body tense. Elias watched him closely. Rex wasn't reacting randomly. His posture meant something specific. He had caught a scent, something strong and recent or deeply embedded. Something buried? Rowan asked. Maybe. Elias crouched beside Rex. What is it, boy? He rested a hand lightly on the dog's back. Rex scratched once, weak due to his injury, but determined, pawing at a cluster of stacked crates. Elias and Rowan exchanged a glance, then began clearing them away. Beneath the crates, the wooden floor changed color. The planks were newer, lighter, less worn. Too new for a 70-year-old shed. Elias tested one board. It shifted slightly. It's loose. Rowan knelt opposite him, breath misting in the cold. Together, they pried the board up. Beneath it was a narrow cavity framed with old, warped beams. A stale, earthy smell rose from within. Inside lay a single medium-sized wooden crate wrapped in dark, oil-stained canvas. The air in the shed seemed to tighten. Elias lifted the crate out and set it on the floor. Dust puffed from the canvas as they unwrapped it. Rowan's breath hitched. Inside were items that didn't belong anywhere near a quiet mountain cabin. A folded topographical map marked with red circles along winter routes. A burner phone, battery removed. Several empty vacuum-sealed bags, hinting at their old contents. A spiral notebook filled with coded entries, initials, dates, and drop points. Rowan stared, stunned. This is cartel layout. These are route markers. This is how they move product through the ridge during storm seasons. He lifted the map, tracing one circle with trembling fingers. These match locations from cases we've investigated, every one of them. But these go back years. Elias's jaw tightened. So, the cabin was used for this long before I ever bought it. Rowan nodded, piecing it together. The owner before you must have been involved somehow, or terrified enough to sell and run. He flipped through the notebook. Some of these entries are at least 5 years old. Rex sniffed the crate again and gave a single sharp bark. Elias stiffened. That bark wasn't curiosity, it was alarm. Rowan immediately looked toward the open door. Outside, the snow muffled most sounds, but something, a faint crunch, carried through the crisp air. The kind of sound only a trained ear or a trained dog would notice. Someone was out there. Elias moved to the doorway. The world outside was still and deceptively peaceful. Pines swayed gently. Snow sparkled. No movement. But then, a flicker of shadow at the tree line. A figure, barely visible, retreating into the woods. Not running, not charging, just slipping away like smoke, the way someone does when they want to be seen just enough. Elias narrowed his eyes. We're being watched. Rowan stepped beside him, one hand gripping his coat near a wound. The cartel must check this site occasionally. If someone saw the storm died down, they probably came to confirm the stash. And now they know someone else found it, Elias said. Rex took a step forward, letting out a low growl that vibrated through his chest. Elias placed a hand on the dog's neck. Easy, old boy. For a long moment, the three stood at the entrance of the shed, listening. The woods whispered back. The distant crack of a branch. the soft rush of wind. No voices, no footsteps, but they all felt it. The presence watching them from somewhere deeper, somewhere cold and hidden. Elias motioned Rowan and Rex back inside the shed. Carefully, they rewrapped the crate and lowered it back into the cavity. Rowan placed the map and notebook inside his jacket, close to his chest. "If they come back and find this missing, they'll know someone recovered it," Rowan said. "Better they think it's untouched," Elias replied. "We'll hide our prints, cover the snow, make it look like we never opened this place." Rowan nodded. "The more time we buy, the better." Rex limped toward the doorway again, nose raised, scanning the wind. His ears flicked back and forth, wary, alert. Elias watched him with admiration. The dog's devotion and instinct were almost supernatural. "If someone's out there," Elias said quietly, "he already knows we're prepared." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Prepared. But for what exactly?" Elias didn't answer. The question wasn't meant to be answered. They left the shed, smoothing over their tracks with fresh snow. The sky overhead had darkened slightly again, as if gathering the next storm. Rowan glanced over his shoulder one last time. The tree line was empty, but the hairs along his arms stood on end, and Rex's steady growl was proof enough. They were no longer alone. 2 days passed, each one etched with a stillness that did not feel like peace. The storm that had blanketed North Vale Ridge had given way to unnervingly clear skies. The snow lay untouched across the valley, smooth as porcelain, reflecting a sun that did little to fight the cold. Silence clung to the pines, thick enough that every crack of ice or distant shift of snow felt like a whisper of warning. Inside the cabin, Rowan Blake was recovering slowly. His ribs ached when he breathed too deeply, and a dull pulsing throbbed along his shoulder wound, but strength was returning piece by piece. He spent hours reviewing the coded notebook they had retrieved from the shed, trying to decipher patterns in the smuggler routes. His brow often furrowed in frustration, half pain, half determination. Rex, for his part, stayed near the windows, his dark eyes tracking every flicker of movement outside the glass. The wound along his hind leg remained tender, and his gait was uneven, but not once did he allow himself to fully rest. Whenever Rowan shifted too quickly or Elias stepped outside, Rex's ears perked, his body tensing. Loyalty radiated from the old dog like heat from the stove. Elias' heart kept himself busy reinforcing the cabin. He boarded vulnerable windows, checked old gaps in the walls, and reinforced the front door's hinges. The work came naturally to him. He handled tools with the precision of someone who had once fortified crime scenes or built makeshift cover during field operations. There was something familiar in the process, something that pulled him back into an old version of himself, one he wasn't sure he wanted to revive. On the evening of the second day, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Rex suddenly lifted his head from the blanket. His ears shot forward. A low, barely audible rumble vibrated from his chest. Elias froze mid-step. Rowan set down the notebook. Rex stood, putting weight on his injured leg despite the pain. His eyes were locked on the front door. "You hear something?" Rowan whispered. Elias already had his coat and boots on. Rex heard it. He cracked open the cabin door an inch. At first there was only silence. Then, faint but unmistakable, a rustle. Not the random settling of snow or the groan of a tree trunk. It was rhythmic, intentional. Bootsteps. Elias's voice dropped. "Someone's out there." Rowan reached for the pistol Elias had loaned him earlier. He moved with care, avoiding sharp breaths, but his eyes were sharp and steady. The dog's growl deepened. Then the smell hit them. Smoke. Not the warm, comforting smoke of burning pine, but sharp, bitter, acrid smoke carried on the wind. "Back shed," Elias hissed. They rushed out the back door. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they rounded the cabin. Rowan stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, but caught himself. As they approached the shed, a flicker of orange reflected off the snow. Flames licked the lower. Beams of the wooden structure, small but growing fast. "They started it low," Elias muttered. "Away from the wind, so it spread slow but steady." Rowan's jaw clenched. Smart. They didn't want to draw attention. Elias scanned the perimeter. This wasn't random. They know the shed's important. Rex suddenly launched forward. Not running, limping quickly, ears sharp, nose pointed toward the left side of the clearing. He stopped abruptly, staring at a shadow beside the burning shed. Rowan followed the dog's cue. There! A figure moved, darting behind the shed, trying to use the firelight and smoke as cover. Rowan raised his pistol. Show yourself! He shouted. Silence. Then another figure darted behind the woodpile on the opposite side. Two of them, Elias muttered. A third shape appeared along the tree line, faint in the dimness. Three, Rowan corrected, breath sharp. Elias scanned the dark. Maybe four. A spark of movement, then footsteps crunched toward them rapidly. The first attacker lunged from behind the shed, swinging a short blade toward Rowan. Rowan barely got his arm up in time. Pain shot through his ribs, nearly buckling him. But Rex moved before instinct could even settle. The dog didn't leap with reckless force. Instead, he circled low and fast, biting at the attacker's calf from the blind side. The man stumbled, swore, and dropped the blade just long enough for Rowan to shove him backward and disarm him. Another attacker charged Elias from the right. Elias stepped back, using the snow to his advantage, and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, knocking him flat. The snow softened the impact, but not the blow from Elias's fist that followed. A third silhouette appeared behind Rowan, gun raised. Rowan, down! Elias tackled the officer sideways. A gunshot cracked through the freezing air. Snow exploded at the spot Rowan had been standing. Rex snarled, positioning himself between Rowan and the shooter, teeth bared. The old dog's hackles rose and his legs trembled, but he didn't step back. The third attacker hesitated. It was enough. Elias fired once. The bullet struck the attacker's thigh, sending him collapsing into the snow, weapon tumbling from his hand. The fourth man, the one lurking furthest back, began to run. But Rowan, catching his breath, raised his pistol and fired a warning shot. The bullet hit the snow inches from the man's feet. He froze, hands half raised. Drop it, Rowan demanded. Slowly the fourth attacker complied. Smoke crept thicker from the burning shed. Flames were climbing the beams now, roaring louder with each second. We need one alive, Elias said. Tie them. Together, they dragged the wounded third attacker toward the cabin, keeping pistols trained on him. The others, either injured or unconscious, were left in the snow temporarily. They only needed one voice. Inside the cabin, with the man tied to a chair, Rowan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Elias stood with his arms crossed. The captive was a wiry man in his late 30s, wearing insulated black clothing and boots meant for winter trails. His face was angular, his jaw tight with defiance. "You don't know what you're doing," the man spat. "This isn't your fight." Elias tilted his head. "You brought the fight here." Rowan stepped closer, eyes cold despite his pain. "You tried to kill me. You and your friends nearly killed my dog. Now you're going to talk." The man smirked. "You think killing a shed hurts us?" "We know what was in that shed before," Rowan said. "We know this whole place was a drop point." The man stiffened ever so slightly. Rowan continued. "And we know someone inside my department told you exactly where I'd be that night." Silence. Then the man's smirk slipped. Rowan's voice dropped lower. "Tell me the name." Elias leaned forward slightly. Rex, lying near Rowan's feet, lifted his head, eyes fixed on the captive. A long moment passed. Then finally, "Mark Ellison," the man muttered. "Deputy Ellison. He's been feeding us intel for months. Patrol routes, surveillance blind spots, who's snooping too close." Rowan froze. Elias saw the devastation flicker through the younger man's eyes. Ellison had been his colleague, his friend. "Why?" Rowan whispered. The captive shrugged. "Money, power. People like him don't need much convincing." Elias stepped forward, tightening the rope around the man's wrists. "You should pray we hand you to the right people. Otherwise, this night ends differently." Outside, the shed burned hot and bright, casting orange light through the frosted windows like a warning from the mountain's ancient heart. Inside, the truth had finally taken shape, ugly, sharp, and far from finished. Night settled slowly over North Vale Ridge, pulling a veil of quiet across the frozen landscape. The burning shed had collapsed hours earlier, leaving only a smoldering skeleton of blackened beams. Snowflakes drifted over the charred remains, muffling the last whispers of smoke. The air tasted of cold metal and ash, a reminder that danger had come close, too close, and had not finished what it came for. Inside the cabin, the captured attacker had been tied securely and left unconscious after Elias struck him with the butt of a rifle when he tried to flee. Rowan Blake now sat at the wooden table, his breath steady, but his eyes storming. The revelation of Deputy Mark Ellison's betrayal gnawed at something deeper than anger. It was the kind of hurt that carved itself into a man's bones. Elias stood by the front window, scanning the dark. His silhouette was hard and steady, like an old statue carved into the mountain. Behind him, Rex lay with his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The dog had not slept more than a few minutes at a time since the attackers came. Every shift of wind made his ears twitch. Rowan finally broke the silence. "We have to report this." Elias didn't turn from the window. "To who?" Rowan exhaled heavily. "There's one person I trust. One." He gestured toward the sat phone lying on the table. "Kate Mercer, DEA, she and I worked a joint case 2 years ago. One of the only people who believed the Winter Crows never truly disbanded." Elias nodded. "Call her." Rowan dialed, voice hushed but urgent when she answered. "Kate, it's me." A beat of silence. Then, "Rowan? You're supposed to be dead." "Almost was." Rowan's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Listen, I've found evidence. Routes, codes. The Crows are active again. And Ellison, he's the leak. I have proof." Kate's voice hardened. "Where are you?" "In the mountains. A cabin off Bearclaw Peak. But listen, you can't come now. The roads are frozen, the trail's worse. And Carter Hale is moving. They'll be back." Kate inhaled sharply. "Rowan, stay put. I need time to pull a team together. 8 to 10 hours, minimum." Rowan's fingers tightened around the phone. "We may not have that long." "Then hold," Kate said. "Just hold." The call ended. Rowan lowered the phone, meeting Elias's gaze. "She's coming." "Good," Elias said. "Then we make sure we're alive when she gets here." Preparation began immediately. Elias moved like a man awakened to something old, something trained into muscle memory. He walked the perimeter with a flashlight tucked between his teeth, studying the snow for tracks, evaluating vantage points. Rowan followed a few steps behind, slower but steady, gripping the cabin wall whenever pain flared from his ribs. "You've done this before," Rowan said. Elias didn't respond for a moment. "I've done worse." Behind them, Rex limped loyally, refusing to stay inside. Every time they paused, he sniffed the air, then looked north toward the trail, toward danger. Elias began setting up makeshift defenses. He rigged small metal cans on fishing line between 2 pines, a low, soft alarm system that would shake snow loose if someone approached. He dug shallow trenches beneath the drifts that would collapse under weight. He inserted reflective shards from a broken mirror into the snowbanks so moonlight would glint off them, allowing him to watch blind corners from the cabin window. Rowan helped stack lumber and old tractor tires into a crude barricade near the rear porch. "Think this will be enough?" Rowan asked, breathing hard. Elias brushed snow off his gloves. "No." Rowan blinked. "Then why do it?" "Because it slows them," Elias said. "And sometimes slowing is enough." The words carried the weight of experience, of battles Elias had never spoken about. Rex barked once, sharply. He stared into the tree line, his tail stiff, body leaning forward. "He senses something," Rowan said. "Not yet," Elias murmured. "But soon." By the time the sky dimmed into a deep winter blue, the land was ready. Inside the cabin, they turned off all lights except the stove's faint glow. Rowan positioned himself near the back window with a pistol. Elias sat near the front, rifle laid across his lap, eyes fixed on the tree line. Hours crawled, the cold pressed harder against the glass. Then, a hum, low, growing, not the wind, not the storm, engines. Rex rose immediately, ears locked forward. "Here we go," Elias whispered. 2 sets of headlights broke through the trees, cutting harsh white beams across the untouched snow. The SUV tires cracked the ice beneath them as they rolled slowly into the clearing, cautious but confident. Rowan's breath hitched. Carter Hale. The man who stepped out of the lead SUV was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, a heavy winter coat lined with fur. His hair was dark, and even at a distance, his presence radiated authority, the cruel kind built on fear. Carter Hale scanned the cabin with a predator's calm, his gloved hand resting casually on the rifle slung across his shoulder. Another man stepped out behind him, face covered, moving with military stiffness. Then two more emerged from the second SUV. Elias counted quickly. 4, maybe one more inside the car. Rowan straightened painfully. We can't let them flank us. We won't. Elias raised a hand. Rowan nodded. Rex growled. The standoff lasted only seconds. Then Carter shouted, "Blake, you have something of mine, and I've come to collect." Elias whispered, "He wants the notebook." Rowan swallowed. "He's not getting it." Carter lifted his chin. "You can come out now. Save that dog of yours some trouble." Rex's growl deepened. Elias squeezed Rowan's shoulder gently. "Wait for it." A breeze swept across the clearing, stirring loose flakes of snow. The moon peeked through the clouds, casting pale light over the ridge. Then Elias whispered, "Now." Rowan fired the first shot, clean, precise, shattering the right headlight of the lead SUV. Sparks burst into the cold air. Chaos erupted. Carter dove behind the vehicle. His men scattered, 2 running left, 1 right, firing blindly toward the windows. Bullets tore into the log frame, wood splintering across the floor. Elias returned fire with calm precision, forcing one attacker behind a snowbank. Rowan shifted positions, teeth gritted from pain, and aimed at the shooter trying to flank the cabin. Rex barked fiercely, staying low, scanning every window for movement. When he spotted the man circling left, Rex sprinted to the back door, positioning himself directly between Rowan and the danger. His body lowered into a defensive stance, protection, not aggression, pure loyalty. One attacker stepped into Elias's trap. His boot sank into a false snowbank, collapsing into the trench. Elias hit him with a non-lethal shot to the shoulder, dropping him flat. Another came from behind the shed remnants, but Rowan fired twice, driving him back. Then, from the north, a thunderous chopping echoed above the treetops. Rowan froze. No way. A helicopter's searchlight burst through the darkness, flooding the clearing with white brilliance. Elias shielded his eyes. DEA! The helicopter circled. 2 more SUVs barreled down the ridge trail, with federal insignia glinting in the moonlight. Agents poured out, weapons drawn. Carter Hale attempted to run for the trees. Kate Mercer herself stepped from the nearest SUV, voice sharp and amplified over the helicopter's hum. "Carter Hale, on the ground! Hands where I can see them!" Outnumbered, overwhelmed, his empire collapsing, Carter dropped his rifle into the snow and slowly sank to his knees. Within minutes, he was cuffed and dragged toward the vehicles. Rowan leaned against the porch railing, chest rising heavily. Elias offered an arm to steady him. Rex pressed against Rowan's leg, tail thumping weakly. Elias gave a rare, small smile. "We held." Rowan exhaled. "Barely. Barely still counts," Elias replied. Above them, the final flakes of the night drifted down, softening the echoes of gunfire and replacing them with silence once more. The last hunt in the snow was over, at least for now. 3 weeks had passed since the night the winter crows had fallen. 3 weeks since gunfire cracked across the clearing, since Carter Hale knelt in the snow beneath the sweep of DEA floodlights, and since Rowan Blake realized how close he had come to vanishing in a storm with only Rex to carry truth forward. Winter still gripped Northvale Ridge, but the violence had melted away. In its place lingered a stillness that felt real, not the threatening quiet from before, but the gentle, fragile kind that comes after a long, hard winter finally exhales. The cabin stood stronger than before. Elias had spent days repairing the front porch, replacing splintered boards with new pine planks and reinforcing the rail. The smell of fresh lumber blended with the crisp winter air. The charred remains of the shed had been cleared, leaving a bare patch of earth soon to be covered by snowfall once more. Rowan helped as much as his healing ribs allowed, though Elias insisted he shouldn't lift anything heavier than Rex's water bowl. Inside, the stove hummed a soft, steady warmth. Rowan Blake sat on the porch steps wrapped in a thick flannel jacket, sipping hot tea. His face still held traces of exhaustion, but his eyes, once haunted, now carried a growing steadiness. He looked more like a man reclaiming himself piece by piece. 2 days prior, he had received the official reinstatement letter from the governor's office. Commendation for bravery, full honors restored. The words felt heavy in his hands that first night, but tonight they rested lightly in his pocket, as though they finally belonged there. Rex lay stretched across the porch boards beside him, muzzle resting on his paws. The dog's injured leg had healed enough for him to move without limping, though Elias insisted on short walks only. The new collar around Rex's neck gleamed silver. It bore an engraved medallion, K9 Defender's badge, service, loyalty, honor. The old shepherd seemed to understand its meaning. Whenever the medallion chimed faintly against his collar, his ears perked proudly. The quiet of the afternoon was interrupted by the crunch of heavy footsteps. Rowan looked up to see Margaret Hale, the closest neighbor, though still nearly 2 miles down the trail, walking toward them with a canvas sack slung over her shoulder. Margaret was in her early 60s, a broad-shouldered woman with hair the color of dried wheat tied in a loose bun. She wore a thick wool sweater and patched snow pants, and her cheeks were always rosy in winter, as if the cold simply couldn't find a way to defeat her spirit. She was known for her blunt honesty and stubborn compassion. Life had carved tough lines into her hands from years of tending land and caring for her late husband, but her eyes were warm, a steady, comforting amber. She reached the porch and huffed dramatically. "If either of you thought I'd let you start planting without supervision, you're sorely mistaken." Rowan chuckled. "Supervision? I thought you were bringing supplies." "Oh, I brought supplies," Margaret said, patting the sack. "Heirloom tomatoes, peas, sunflowers, carrot seed for spring. But I'm staying to make sure you two don't plant them upside down." She winked at Elias. "Men, left unsupervised, can't be trusted with soil." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And yet, here you are, trusting us anyway." Margaret grinned. "I don't trust you, I trust the dog." Rex wagged his tail, earning a scratch under the chin. Together, the three of them worked in the yard, a patch near the rebuilt shed. Rowan shoveled shallow trenches slowly, his healing ribs constraining his movements. Elias measured distances for planting rows. Margaret dropped seeds with surprisingly gentle hands for someone so tough, murmuring small blessings under her breath. Rex trotted between them, occasionally stopping to sniff the soil or watch the birds dancing overhead. Later, with their hands dirty and spirits lighter than they had been in months, they returned to the porch. Steam rose from mugs of hot cider Margaret insisted on preparing in the cabin kitchen. The crunch of tires on snow broke the peaceful rhythm. A dark SUV rolled to a careful stop near the fence. Rowan and Elias exchanged glances, both instinctively reaching for weapons, not out of fear, but habit. But when the door opened and a woman stepped out, Rowan immediately relaxed. Special Agent Sarah Green walked toward them, her boots making crisp impressions in the snow. She was in her late 40s, tall and composed, with auburn hair pulled into a neat braid and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Though dressed casually, jeans, boots, a windbreaker, she carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had spent decades defusing danger. She had led the DEA's operation during Carter Hale's capture. Rowan had only spoken with her briefly that night, but he had felt something rare, trust. "Agent Green," Rowan greeted warmly, "didn't expect a field visit." She smiled, subtle but genuine. "Figured I owed you both more than a memo." In her hands were 2 envelopes. One bore Rowan's name, the other Elias's. "Also, Rex, I have something for him." Rex perked up immediately, tail thumping. Green knelt, clipping a small polished tag beside Rex's medallion. It gleamed in the weak sunlight. "Defender of Liberty," engraved beneath a small K9 emblem. "Not protocol," she whispered, "but he earned it." Rowan's eyes softened as he watched his partner lift his head proudly. Green stood and handed Rowan his envelope. Inside was a formal commendation from the governor, more personal than the reinstatement notice, written in long, careful strokes. Rowan skimmed the words, exhaling shakily. Gratitude welled inside him, deep, quiet, steady. Next, Green handed Elias his envelope. Elias opened it more cautiously. Inside was a letter written gentle handwriting, a message from the widow of an officer who had once served with him. She thanked him for stepping in, for defending what was right when others stayed silent, for saving Rowan when fate nearly stole another good man. The note ended with, "My husband always said you were the kind who ran toward danger for people you barely knew. Thank you for proving him right." Elias's breath hitched. He folded the note with care, like something fragile. Margaret joined them with a new tray of cider. "Sit," she demanded. "You're guests." Green laughed softly. "I suppose I am." She sat on the porch rail, accepting a mug. They drank together as the afternoon settled into golden light. The snow sparkled as the sun slid behind Bear Claw Peak, casting long amber beams across the yard. Rex stretched, then flopped onto his side with a deep, satisfied sigh. For a long time, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Finally, Elias leaned back in his wooden chair, his silhouette framed by sunlight. "Never thought I'd feel peace on this land again," he murmured. Rowan looked at him, then at Rex, then at the repaired cabin. "And now?" Elias smiled faintly. "Now, I think this land remembers what it's for." "A home," Rowan said quietly. Elias nodded. "A place worth fighting for." Rex barked once, sharp, proud, echoing like a promise across the valley. The others laughed, the sound warm enough to challenge the cold. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting the final flare of daylight across the snow and the half-finished garden beds, the moment crystallized. 3 souls who had survived darkness, now sharing light. A scarred land healing beneath winter. A loyal dog standing guard, not from fear, but from love. Sometimes spring hides beneath the snow, and sometimes hope returns long before the thaw. Sometimes the miracles God sends are not wrapped in thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to abandon his partner, through a man who learns to stand again after life has broken him, or through the kindness of strangers who choose courage over fear. This story reminds us that even in the cold seasons of our lives, God walks beside us. He guides our steps, protects our families, and lights a path when everything feels dark. In our everyday moments, we face storms of our own, worry, loneliness, the weight of things we rarely speak aloud. But God moves through simple acts of love and through the people He places on our path. When we choose faith, we make room for His quiet miracles. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe to our channel for more stories that lift the spirit and honor love and loyalty. May God bless you with peace and protection wherever you are. And if you believe that His miracles still find us in the darkest hours, type Amen in the comments.